The subway screeched to a halt, and Paul's heart shattered all over again. He slumped in the hard plastic seat, his hands pressed against his face, trying to block out the world. The divorce papers from Salome, signed 7 years ago, still burned in his mind like a wound that wouldn't heal. He'd lost her, his love, his home, his everything. And the city's endless noise couldn't drown out his regret. Then a voice broke through, small but clear, like a bell in a storm. A little girl was singing, her melody soft but piercing, the exact song Paul and Salome used to hum on quiet nights, wrapped in each other's arms. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Paul's head snapped up, his breath catching. There she was, a tiny girl, maybe 7, with big brown eyes and a worn jacket too big for her small frame. She clutched grocery bags heavy with cans and medicine bottles, her knuckles white from the effort. Her voice trembled slightly, but her song was steady, filling the grimy subway car with warmth. Paul's chest ached. How did she know that song? The one he and Salome sang on their first date, under the flickering streetlights of Brooklyn, when love felt like it could conquer anything. "Who are you?" Paul whispered, his voice rough, barely audible over the train's rumble. The girl stopped singing, her eyes meeting his. They were bright, like Salome's used to be, but shadowed with a weight no kid should carry. "You look sad, mister," she said, her smile soft but brave. "I thought a song might help." Her words hit like a punch, tender but sharp. Paul's eyes stung, and he blinked hard, trying to keep the tears at bay. He hadn't cried since the day Salome walked out, taking his heart with her. He'd been searching for her ever since, chasing rumors through the city's maze, bars, shelters, old friends' apartments, but she'd vanished like smoke. Now this girl, with her 2 big bags and their song, stood like a ghost from his past. "What's your name, kid?" Paul asked, his hands shaking as he leaned forward. "Laura," she said, adjusting the bags. A can of soup slipped, and Paul caught it before it hit the floor. "Thanks," she said, her smile flickering. "I'm getting stuff for my mom. She's sick." Paul's heart twisted. Sick, alone, a kid carrying groceries through the subway at night. "Why that song?" he asked, his voice tight. He needed to know, needed to understand why this girl's voice felt like a key to his locked-away memories. Laura shrugged, her small shoulders lifting under her jacket. "My mom sings it when she's sad, says it reminds her of someone special." Her words were a spark, igniting a fire of questions in Paul's mind. Someone special. Was it him? Could Laura's mom be Salome? His Salome? The train lurched and Paul steadied himself, his eyes never leaving Laura. "You alone out here?" he asked, his voice soft but urgent. The subway was no place for a kid, not with its flickering lights and shadows that hid trouble. "Yeah, but I'm okay," Laura said, her voice steady despite the weight of her bags. "Mom needs me. I do this all the time." Paul's stomach churned. He saw himself in her, trying to hold everything together when the world was falling apart. He'd been like that after the divorce, working late at his construction job, drinking to forget Salome's laugh, her touch, her trust. "Let me help you with those," he said, standing before he could stop himself. He took the bags, their weight surprising him, and followed Laura as the train doors hissed open. The city night was cold, the air sharp with exhaust and the distant wail of sirens. Neon signs flickered above pawn shops and bodegas, casting red and blue shadows on Laura's face. She walked fast, her small legs moving with purpose, and Paul struggled to keep up, his mind racing. "You live far?" he asked, his boots crunching on broken glass. "Not too far," Laura said, glancing back. "Just a few blocks. Mom's waiting." She chattered as they walked, her voice a bright thread in the dark. She talked about her mom's fever, how she'd learned to make soup from a YouTube video, how she wished she could buy better medicine. Each word painted a picture of a life too heavy for a kid, and Paul's guilt grew. If this was Salome, how had he let her end up like this? They reached a crumbling apartment building, its bricks stained with years of city grime. The lobby smelled of damp walls and burnt toast, and the stairs creaked under Paul's boots. Laura pushed open a door on the 3rd floor, and the sight inside stopped Paul cold. A tiny apartment, barely bigger than his old pickup truck, with peeling wallpaper and a single bulb casting weak light. On a worn couch buried in blankets was Salome. Her face was thinner, her dark hair tangled, her eyes dull with sickness. But it was her, his Salome, the woman he'd loved since he was 20, the woman he'd lost to lies and mistakes. She stirred, her eyes widening as they locked onto his. "Paul?" Her voice was a whisper, raw with shock and something deeper. Pain, maybe, or fear. "Mom, I brought a friend," Laura said, setting the groceries on a rickety table. "He helped me carry stuff." Salome's gaze didn't leave Paul. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. She pulled the blanket tighter, like it could shield her from the past. Paul's throat tightened. "I didn't know it was you," he said, his voice breaking. "Laura." She sang our song. He saw the flicker in Salome's eyes, the memory of their nights humming together, planning a future that never came. "I had to know if it was you." Laura looked between them, her brow furrowed. "You know each other?" she asked, her small voice cutting through the tension. Salome's lips pressed tight, but her eyes softened. "A long time ago," she said, her voice heavy with secrets. Paul wanted to ask everything. Why she left, where she'd been, who Laura was to him. But Salome's gaze begged him to wait. He saw the fear in her, the walls she'd built to protect herself and her daughter. Before he could speak, Salome coughed, a deep rattling sound that made Laura flinch. Paul's heart dropped. "She needs a doctor," he said, his voice firm. He knelt beside the couch, his hand hovering near Salome's, not daring to touch. "Now." Laura's eyes filled with tears, her brave mask cracking. "We can't afford it," she whispered, her voice small. Paul's chest ached, rage and guilt twisting together. "I'll take care of it," he said, the words a vow. He looked at Laura, her small hands clutching her mom's blanket, and saw a strength he hadn't had at her age. He wouldn't let her down. Not like he'd let Salome down. They called an ambulance, the siren's wail echoing through the city as Paul held Laura's hand. At the hospital, under harsh white lights, Salome lay in a bed, tubes snaking from her arm. Laura sat beside her, her small body curled in a chair, her eyes never leaving her mom. Paul paced, his boots squeaking on the linoleum, his mind a storm of questions. Was Laura his? The math added up. 7 years since the divorce. Laura's age. It was possible, but Salome's silence told him she wasn't ready to answer. Days passed and Paul stayed. He brought Laura burgers from the cafeteria, helped her with math homework, watched her smile flicker back. Salome woke, her eyes clearer but still guarded. "Why are you doing this, Paul?" she asked one night, her voice sharp but trembling. "Because I never stopped loving you," he said, his heart bare. "And because I need to know, is Laura mine?" Salome's face crumpled, a tear slipping down her cheek. She looked at Laura, asleep in the chair, and nodded. "She's yours," she whispered. "I didn't tell you because I thought you didn't want us." The words hit like a brick, stealing Paul's breath. Laura, his daughter, the girl who sang his song, who carried his heart without knowing it. His eyes burned, but he held back the tears. "I want you both," he said, his voice raw. "I always have." Salome looked away, her hands trembling. "It's not that simple," she said. "You hurt me, Paul. You left." "I didn't leave," he said, his voice breaking. "You pushed me away. I've been looking for you for years." The room fell silent, the weight of their past heavy between them. Laura stirred, her small hand reaching for her mom's, and Paul's heart ached. He wouldn't lose them again. Not now. Not ever. But as they left the hospital, a voice cut through the night, sharp and familiar. "Paul? Is that you?" Eva Brown stood in the parking lot, her smile cold as the city wind. Her eyes flicked to Salome and Laura, glinting with trouble. "Well, look at this, your little family." Salome stiffened, her hand tightening on Laura's. Paul's blood ran cold. Eva was the woman who'd poisoned their marriage, her lies driving Salome away. And now she was back, her presence a threat to everything he was fighting for. Eva's laugh sliced through the hospital parking lot like a shard of glass, sharp and cold. "So, Paul, you're playing daddy now." Her words dripped with venom, her red lipstick curling into a smirk as she eyed Salome and Laura. Paul's fist clenched, his heart pounding with a storm of rage and fear. Eva Brown was the shadow that had torn his marriage apart 7 years ago. Her lies, her whispered rumors of his betrayal, her cruel smile as Salome walked away. Now she stood under the flickering streetlights, her presence a threat to the fragile family he was fighting to rebuild. "Walk away, Eva," Paul growled, stepping in front of Salome and Laura. His voice was low, dangerous, but his hands shook. He remembered the night Eva's lies unraveled everything. Salome's tears, her suitcase by the door, the silence that followed. He wouldn't let her destroy them again. Salome's eyes blazed, her thin frame taut despite her recent hospital stay. She pulled Laura closer, her hand trembling but firm. "You don't get to hurt us anymore," she said, her voice steady, fierce, like a mother lion protecting her cub. Laura's big eyes darted between them, confused, her small body pressed against her mom's side. Eva's smirk widened, her heels clicking on the pavement as she stepped closer. "Hurt you? Oh, honey, I just told the truth. Paul was never good enough for you." Her gaze flicked to Laura, sharp and calculating. "And this kid? She's better off without a father who runs when things get tough." Salome's hand shot out, grabbing Eva's arm. "Don't you dare talk about my daughter." The air crackled, the city's hum fading as tension swallowed the moment. Paul's heart raced. He'd never seen Salome like this, her strength shining through her sickness. He stepped between them, his voice a growl. "Enough, Eva. Leave, now." Eva's eyes narrowed, but she laughed, a brittle sound that echoed off the hospital's concrete walls. "This isn't over, Paul," she said, her voice low, promising trouble. "I know things that could ruin your little fairy tale." She turned, her coat swishing, and vanished into the city's shadows, leaving a chill that lingered like fog. Paul turned to Salome, his chest tight. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft. Salome's eyes were hard, but tears glistened. "She's the reason I left you," she whispered. "Her lies. I believed them." Laura tugged at her mom's hand, her face pale. "Who was that lady, Mom?" "Nobody important," Salome said, forcing a smile. But Paul saw the fear in her eyes, the old wounds reopening. He wanted to hold her, to promise he'd fix everything, but the weight of their past held him back. They drove to Paul's mansion in silence, the city's neon lights blurring past. The house was a world away from Salome's cramped apartment, a sprawling brick estate with tall windows and a garden Laura gasped at. "It's like a castle," she squealed, running through the front door, her sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. Paul's heart swelled, watching her twirl under the chandelier, her laughter filling the empty spaces he'd lived with for years. For the first time, the mansion felt like a home, but Salome was quieter, her eyes scanning the high ceilings, the plush couches, the life Paul had built without her. "Why is she back, Paul?" she asked that night, as Laura slept upstairs in a room with stars painted on the ceiling. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the crackle of the fireplace. "What does Eva want?" Paul sank into a chair, his hands running through his hair. "She's always wanted to win," he said, his voice heavy. "Back then, she lied about me, said I was cheating, said I didn't love you." "I didn't, Salome." I swear his eyes met hers, pleading. "I loved you every day, I still do." Salome's gaze softened, but her lips stayed tight. "I was pregnant with Laura when she told me," she said, her voice breaking. "I was scared, Paul. I thought you didn't want us, so I ran." She looked away, her fingers twisting the edge of her sweater. "I've been running ever since." Paul's throat tightened, memories flooding back. Salome's laugh in their old apartment, her hand in his as they danced to the radio, the fight that ended it all. "You were pregnant?" he whispered, his voice raw. "And you didn't tell me?" "I thought you'd leave us," she said, tears spilling. "I couldn't lose you and Laura both." Paul reached for her hand, his own trembling. "I wanted you more than anything," he said. "I've spent years looking for you, Salome. Every bar, every street, every corner of this city." His voice cracked, and he didn't care. "I want you both now, forever." Salome didn't pull away, but her eyes held a question. Could she trust him again? The silence stretched, heavy with hope and hurt, until Laura's voice called from upstairs. "Mom, can I have water?" Salome wiped her tears and Paul followed her, his heart aching but full. Days turned into weeks, and Paul threw himself into being there for them. He burned pancakes, laughing when Laura teased him, her giggles echoing through the kitchen. He drove Salome to doctor's appointments, holding her hand when the news was good, her heart when it wasn't. They sat on the porch at night, the city's hum distant, sharing stories of their lost years. Salome talked about raising Laura alone, working double shifts at a diner, hiding her sickness to keep going. Paul shared his own pain, long nights at his construction job, drinking to forget, waking up to an empty house. One evening, as Laura drew pictures at the kitchen table, Paul caught Salome smiling at him, soft and real. "You're different," she said, her voice quiet. "You're here." "I'm not going anywhere," he said, and for the first time she believed him. But then, Laura got sick. It started with a cough, a fever that clung to her like the city's summer heat. Paul's world stopped when she collapsed in the park, her small body limp in his arms as they'd walked to get ice cream. "Laura!" he shouted, his voice raw, panic clawing at his chest. Salome's face went pale, her hands shaking as she dialed 911. The ambulance's siren wailed through the city, a sound Paul would never forget. At the hospital, under lights that buzzed like angry bees, Laura lay in a bed, her small chest rising and falling. Salome sat beside her, her face a mask of fear. "I can't lose her," she whispered, her voice breaking. Paul knelt beside her, his own heart in pieces. "You won't," he said, his voice fierce. "We won't." The doctors worked fast, their voices clipped as they talked about infections and tests. Paul paced the hall, his boots echoing, his mind replaying every moment with Laura. Her song on the subway, her smile in the mansion, her trust in him. He couldn't lose her, not when he just found her. Salome's fear was his own, a shared pain that bound them tighter than ever. Laura pulled through, her smile weak but bright as they brought her home. Paul carried her to her room, her small arms around his neck, and Salome's eyes met his, grateful and soft. "Thank you," she whispered, and he felt the walls between them crumble a little more. But Eva wasn't done. She showed up at the mansion one night, her knock sharp against the heavy door. Paul opened it, his stomach sinking at her cold smile. "Miss me?" she said, stepping inside without waiting. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on Salome and Laura, who sat on the couch with a board game. "Cozy," Eva sneered. "But you can't hide from the truth, Paul. I know things that could tear this apart." Salome stood, her voice like steel. "You don't scare us," she said, stepping closer to Laura. "We're stronger than you." Paul's blood boiled. "Get out," he said, his voice low, dangerous. He remembered Eva's lies, how she'd told Salome he was unfaithful, how she'd twisted his words to break them. "You've done enough." Eva's smile didn't waver. "Have I?" she said, her voice a hiss. "Ask Salome about the letter she wrote you, the one she never sent." She turned, her heels clicking, leaving the words like a bomb. Paul's heart stopped. "What letter?" he asked, turning to Salome. Salome's face paled, her hands trembling. "It was nothing," she said, but her voice shook. "I wrote it when I left, but I couldn't send it." "Tell me," Paul said, his voice soft but urgent. Salome's eyes filled with tears. "I wrote that I loved you," she said, "that I was pregnant, that I was scared. But Eva convinced me you didn't care, so I tore it up." Her voice broke, and she sank onto the couch. "I was wrong, Paul. I should have trusted you." Paul's chest ached, the weight of lost years heavy between them. He knelt beside her, taking her hands. "I should have fought harder," he said, his voice raw. "I'm fighting now. For you. For Laura." Laura climbed into his lap, her small arms around him. "Are you my dad?" she asked, her voice small but clear. Paul's eyes burned, and he looked at Salome, who nodded, tears streaming. "Yeah, kid," he said, his voice thick. "I'm your dad." The weeks that followed were a blur of joy and healing. They went to amusement parks, Laura's laughter ringing as they rode the carousel. They ate ice cream until their stomachs hurt, danced in the living room to Laura's favorite songs. Paul and Salome talked late into the night, unraveling their pain, rebuilding trust. I'm sorry, Paul said one night, his voice heavy, for every mistake I made. I'm sorry too, Salome said, her hand in his. Let's try again. For Laura. For us. Paul's heart soared. They planned a small wedding under the city stars, just them and Laura, who scattered petals with a grin. When Salome said, I do, Paul felt the past lift, replaced by hope. A year later, Salome gave birth to a baby boy, and Paul cried as he held his son, Laura kissing the baby's head. We're complete now, she said, and Paul pulled them close, his heart full. Eva never returned.